at this crucial moment in history, and I salute the courage with which you are meeting today, the way you have continued to meet in spite of the barbaric onslaught on your freedoms. Day after day, missiles and bombs continue to rain on the innocent people of Ukraine. And in the south and the east of your wonderful country, Putin continues with his grotesque and illegal campaign to take and hold Ukrainian soil. And his soldiers no longer have the excuse of not knowing what they are doing. They are committing war crimes, and their atrocities emerge wherever they are forced to retreat, as we've seen at Bucha, at Irpin, at Hostomel, and many other places. And we in the UK will do whatever we can to hold them to account for these war crimes. And in this moment of uncertainty, of continuing fear and doubt about the future, I have one message for you today. Ukraine will win. And I'll tell you why I believe you will succeed, dear members of the Rada. When they came to me last year and they said that there was now overwhelming evidence that Putin was planning an invasion, and we could see his battalion tactical groups, well over 100 of them, gathering on the border, I remember a sense of horror, but also of puzzlement, because I'd been to Kiev on previous visits, and I think I'd met some of you, and I'd stood in the Maidan, and I'd seen the tributes to those who had given their lives to protect Ukraine against Russian aggression. And I've wandered the lovely streets of your capital, and I've seen enough about Ukrainian freedom to know that the Kremlin was making a fundamental miscalculation, a terrible mistake. And I told everybody I knew, anybody who would listen, that Ukraine would fight and Ukraine would be right. And yet there were some who believed the Kremlin propaganda, that Russian armor would be like an irresistible force going like a knife through butter and Kiev would fall in days. Do you remember they said that? And people rang Volodymyr and they offered him safe passage out of the country. And he said, no thanks. And they said that this Rada of yours would have to be reformed outside Ukraine, maybe even in Poland or in London perhaps. And I refused to believe it. And today you have proved them completely wrong. Every one of those military experts who said that Ukraine would fall. And your farmers kidnapped Russian tanks with their tractors. Your pensioners stood up in the road and told Russian soldiers to hop it, as we say, or they may have used more colorful language than that. And even in the parts of Ukraine that were temporarily captured, your populations, your indomitable populations, turned out to protest day after day. And though your soldiers were always outnumbered, 3-1 it is now, they fought with the courage and the energy of lions. And you've beaten them back from Kiev. You have exploded the myth of Putin's invincibility. And you've written one of the most glorious chapters in military history and in the life of your country. The so-called irresistible force of Putin's war machine has broken on the immovable object of Ukrainian patriotism and love of country. This is Ukraine's finest hour that will be remembered and recounted for generations to come. Your children and your grandchildren will say that Ukrainians taught the world that the brute force of an aggressor counts for nothing against the moral force of a people determined to be free. They will say that Ukrainians proved by their tenacity and sacrifice that guns and tanks cannot suppress a nation fighting for its independence. And that is why I believe and I know that Ukraine will win. You've proved the old saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And, which is an old English saying. I don't know how well that translates into Ukrainian, but you get what I'm trying to say. And as you turned the Russian army back from the gates of Kiev, you not only accomplished one of the greatest feats of arms of the 20th century, 21st century, you achieved something deeper and perhaps equally significant. You exposed the historic folly that Putin has made. When a leader rules by fear, and when he rigs his elections, and when he jails his critics, and he refuses to have a free media, and he listens just to sycophants, and when there's no limits on his power, that is when he makes catastrophic mistakes. And it's precisely because we understand this danger in Britain and in Ukraine, and precisely because we are democracies and that we have a free media, the rule of law, free elections, robust parliaments such as your own, we know that these are the best protections against the perils of arbitrary power. And when an autocrat deliberately destroys those institutions, he might look as though he's strong, and some people might even believe it, but he's sowing the seeds of catastrophe for himself and for his country, because there will be nothing to prevent him committing another terrible mistake. Putin's mistake was to invade Ukraine, and the carcasses of Russian armor littering your fields and streets are monuments not only to his folly, but to the dangers of autocracy itself. And what he has done is an advertisement for democracy. On a day when Putin thought he would be in charge of Kiev, I had the honor of being able to visit your wonderful city, and I saw the defiance of the people of Ukraine. And I know so much about the terrible price that Ukrainians have paid and are paying for your heroism. Today, at least one Ukrainian in every 4 has been driven from their homes. 2/3 of all Ukrainian children are now refugees, whether inside the country or elsewhere. So no outsider like me can speak lightly about how this conflict could be settled if only Ukraine would relinquish this or that piece of territory, or we find some compromise for Vladimir Putin. And we know what happens to the people who are left behind in the clutches of this invader. And we who are your friends must be humble about what happened in 2014. Because Ukraine was invaded before, for the first time, and Crimea was taken from Ukraine, and the war in the Donbass began. And the truth is that we were too slow to grasp what was really happening. And we collectively failed to impose the sanctions then that we should have put on Vladimir Putin. And we cannot make the same mistake again. And it's precisely because of your valor, your courage, your sacrifice, that Ukrainians now control your own destiny. And you are the masters of your fate. And no one can or should impose anything on Ukrainians. And all I will say is that we in the UK will be guided by you, and we are proud to be your friends. And I'm proud that our ambassador, Melinda Simmons, is back in Kyiv. I know you know Melinda, to reopen our embassy. And in January, of course, as you were kind enough to say, Mr. Chairman, just before Putin launched his onslaught, we sent you plane loads of anti-tank missiles the enlavs, which I think have now become popular in Kiev and elsewhere. And we have intensified that vital effort, working with dozens of countries, helping to coordinate an ever bigger supply line. And we're sending many thousands of weapons of every kind, including tanks now and armoured vehicles. In the coming weeks, we in the UK will be sending you Brimstone anti-ship missiles and Stormer anti-aircraft systems. And we're providing armoured vehicles to evacuate civilians from areas under attack and protect officials, as what Volodymyr mentioned to me in our most recent call, protect officials while they maintain critical infrastructure. I can announce today from the UK government a new package of support totalling £300 million, including radars to pinpoint the artillery bombarding your cities, heavy lift drones to supply your forces, and thousands of night vision devices. We will carry on supplying Ukraine alongside your other friends with weapons, with funding and humanitarian aid until we have achieved our long-term goal, which must be so to fortify Ukraine that no one will ever dare attack you again. Here in the UK, in my country, you will see Ukrainian flags flying everywhere, from church spires and in shop windows. You see Ukrainian ribbons on the lapels of people up and down the country. And there are many reasons why your country has evoked such astonishing sympathy in the British people. It's a conflict that has no moral ambiguities or grey areas. This is about the right of Ukrainians to protect themselves against Putin's violent and murderous aggression. It's about Ukraine's right to independence and national self-determination against Putin's deranged imperialist revanchism. It's about Ukrainian democracy against Putin's tyranny. It's about freedom versus oppression. It's about right versus wrong. It's about good versus evil. And that is why Ukraine must win.